We're back. So I had someone asked about dirty tricks before. And so I thought I'd go through just some of those things that were maybe not that common in period, but were added in. And thankfully, this is something that we do know a reasonable about, because there's a lot of manuals who have things, who say things like, "Oh, you don't do this in the fencing room." But if you're ever actually if you're ever actually out in combat, here is a useful thing to do. So, I mean, of these, like, a lot of these tend to be grapples or pommel strikes. Grapples, I'm not going to, or I can demonstrate them very quickly, but it's really hard to learn grappling without an opponent. There's actually a theory that some of the weirder kind of martial arts forms, like that you see where the movements don't have any obvious combat application, are actually wrestling forms where what you're doing only really makes sense if you've got another person that you're very specifically manipulating. And so, yeah, but it's very, very hard to work that out or to see that from, when you're just doing it by yourself. But with grappling, with grips, just as a very, very basic, oh, sorry, I've got a quick comment. Cool. So with grips, usually do them off a parry. You don't want to just reach out because you get your hand cut off. But after you've done the parry, all you do is you reach out underneath, grab. You usually want to grab onto the opponent's hilt if you can, or onto their hand of the sword. Reach out, grab. You pull them down. You want to, very, very important, you get your arm to full extension and rotate from the shoulder. Because that way, if you've got a particularly strong opponent or an opponent who is resisting, you can actually use your body weight to continue to manipulate them. So you grab, pull down, and just uncross and hit. So basic movement motion for grips: parry, reach underneath, grab, and pull down, uncross, or really kind of arc more, I guess. Grab, parry, grab, arc and hit. Show that from the other side. I'll show that from the front, probably better. Parry, grab, arc and hit. And you notice that I'm straightening my arm, because again, I basically want to be able to put some of my body weight onto that arm to really push them aside. On the other side, parry, grab, I can come straight out. Nearly always have my thumb down. The reason for that is when I twist, it means my arm is going through the full range of its motion. Whereas if my opponent is like this, they're not going to be able to turn quite as fast. So by the time I get to I turn my hand all the way around, I'll have pulled them into a very uncomfortable position. So parry, grab, uncross and hit. That's some pulling down. The other motion that's really important to this is just kind of pulling, kind of karate motion, where I'm using the power of my hips to get as much strength into the pull as I can. Again, parry, grab, uncross and hit. And when you do this in a bout, your arm is going to come forward a bit. You want to be a bit careful though, because you don't want to telegraph what you're going to do. I once actually had a knife fight with, not an actual, like a sparring match with padded knife, with a guy who was desperately trying to grab me. And most of the match was me hitting him in his grappling hand. His grappling hand kept coming forward because that's what he was desperately trying to do. So yes, again, parry, grab, pull and cross. And so those are grips. The other thing to remember is, even if you don't manage to grab your opponent's wrist or sword, even if you can just displace them, if you can parry and just tap them aside to disrupt their return, that can still give you quite a nice opening. So what I find is, just parry, grip. If you miss the grab, but you still manage to push them, you've still got an opening. And there are manuals that just have, pushing the hand aside or grabbing the hand as separate techniques. I find if you practice grabbing and then screw it up, you've succeeded in pushing the hand. So that's kind of cool. So that's kind of dirty trick number one, is just grabbing the sword hand off a parry. Dirty trick number two is hitting with the pummeling. So if you think of like pummeling someone to death or whatever, the word pummeling comes from pommeling, which is to hit someone with your pommel. So all you do, Alfred Hunt actually says of this, it's not very nice in school play, but there are times when you'll do it if you've got someone who rushes in really aggressively, like just basically runs at you, comes barreling in, which I've seen people do, even like Olympic fencing where they come in really fast and aggressive. All you do is you basically move to this position, bring your tip over your shoulder. So I just go bang, because this just places my opponent's sword to here, and then I come straight back at the face. So just extend out. And what I like to do when I do it, not that I do this in sparring, but like when I'm practicing it, actually turn. So I'm all the way side on to get one, more expulsion, more sort of punch, get the sword out of here, and two, to get more of a turn when I come back. It's that power of the hip, sort of karate punching kind of thing. So again, all I do is bring my sword over my shoulder. So I turn my sword so it's in this position, bring it over my shoulder, and then come back. Turn my sword, bring it over my shoulder, come back. Incidentally, this is a prime parry. It's like second, except on the other side and second on the other side, basically. All right, so sword up, displace, and pommel to the face. Sword up to displace, and pommel to the face. Displace, face. Displace, face. Displace, face. Displace, face. Something you might find helpful as well, switching, when you displace, switching to this heavy grip. I think I mentioned earlier, if you've got like a basketball or broadsword. So, displace, face. Displace, face. And once more for luck, displace, face. So yeah, what other tricks are there? So those are the main two, like grappling and pommel striking. Really the only things that are forbidden in fencing clubs, because if you do them with too much vigor, well, if you do pommel strikes with too much vigor, they can be quite dangerous, and like they're banned in tournaments for good reason. With grappling, I don't know why that fell out of the curriculum. I guess it's because wrestling is seen as a separate skill, and if you want to get good at grapples, like sword grapples, go learn how to wrestle, and especially go learn mixed martial arts, because changing distances, changing ranges, and changing from, kickboxing, or turning a kickboxing match into a wrestling match is a very, very important skill there, and you'll learn it quite well. So other dirty tricks. So there's some cool dirty tricks that the French came up with the defense dancery guys. One of which is if you've got a scabbard, you get imagine this is a metal scabbard. So I don't actually have any saber scabbards, but period scabbards were made of metal, and they had a counterweight at the end. So they could be very, very effectively used as a club. And there's actually a description in a book called Swords in the British Empire, which if you get at all interested in 19th century weapons, you should check out. A lot of cutlass use, a lot of saber use, a lot of squadron use, a little bit of epee use, actually, I think. But there's a description of an account of a battle in India where this British officer is sort of running around carving people up with his sword, and one of his superiors has been watching. And during a brief lull in the fighting, the superior officer turns to him and says, "Look, I know they're the enemy, and I know, like you're just doing your duty, but I can't handle seeing you like butcher your fellow man anymore. Like, can you just put down, can you put down your sword and like, be a bit nicer?" And the guy goes, "Oh," the guy who's running around cutting people up goes, "Oh yeah, sure." Puts his sword down, grabs out his scabbard, and just runs around and starts clubbing people to death with his scabbard, which his poor officer was equally aghast at. But what you can do is you can actually take your scabbard out, come on guard, and you hold your scabbard down here, basically, so it's drifting low. And then when anything comes in on this side, above sort of your waist level, you bring your scabbard up with the back and flick. And the idea is basically using the weight of the scabbard You're sweeping up and knocking anything aside, which gives you this big opening to come back with your sword. So you sit with your scabbard here, sword in. Generally, this works better with a tierce guard because the hand, you can see how my hand might get in my way here. But here in tierce, it's not going to get in the way. Something comes in, scabbard, and counterattack. And all I'm doing is I'm basically just pulling everything back. I'm whipping my hand back, so whip. I'm using all of my joints to get as much speed and power as possible. Just whipping up, coming to bring my hand to near my shoulder. My hip flies way out and comes around. I usually rest on my back, so I put myself in the back of my own scabbard. And displacing my opponent's sword. So, scabbard, riposte. Scabbard, riposte. Scabbard, riposte. Scabbard, riposte. Scabbard, riposte. And scabbard, riposte. Right. So yeah, so that's kind of, those are the main dirty tricks. I mean, there is other stuff like, you can parry and throw a punch, like on a trading. Generally, you want to do that if your opponent's coming very close, coming close enough that you can punch them, but not if you can grapple them. So just parry, punch. So then, if you have to really lean with a cross to get in, just pick it up from the side. From this distance where I have to reach, or I can hit them reaching out, but not here where I could reach them on a grapple. That's when I'll throw a punch. So just parry, punch, parry, punch, parry, punch. So I'm lifting my back foot up to really kind of get a bit of extra reach. Parry, punch. Don't do this in sparring unless you've got very padded gloves, and even then be gentle. Parry, punch. Yeah, so is that. Whatever else? I mean, I think some of the French. There is a French manual I skimmed over where they actually talk about using kicks, like using sort of use of art kicks to come in. Actually, I'm not really familiar enough with that. But yeah, so those are sort of the, I guess, the kind of dirty tricks of the system. There is a bit weird because once you, once you know them, it's, once you teach them to your training partners, they kind of know them. It's harder to avoid. Mosh has one. Oh, okay, yeah, Mosh, if you want to show us your trick, so just. Give me 2 seconds. Yep. All right, sweet. So camera's on you.
So, I can't remember which one it's from, and I apologize for that. But it's less of reactionary against really aggressive, but it's more when you want to fight really aggressive, and especially if they don't give you distance when you do it. And it's entering in with a really heavy, hearty 7, like really like my poor roof. But really coming over and even overarching it enough to try and get them into a St. George of some kind. And as you impact, rotating around on that impact to basket straight in the face. And yeah, that was just as you were going through the others, it was just like, yeah, I know that one.
That's glorious.
Right.
Okay, I probably shouldn't add that to my repertoire, but that is very, very cool. So, that reminds me of one other one actually. This one is a little harder. I'm not very good at it, but if you're a good wrestler and you know how to do a double leg takedown, or if you're a good rugby player and you know how to tackle, what you can do is go to a St. George. You deliberately lower yourself down, or if you're short, just be short. St. George is a favorite area of takedown. But then what you do is you come in and you do like a single leg or a double leg takedown, or basically a tackle. So someone comes in, you parry St. George, you can just get low as you parry, so it's down and then in. And I'm really bad at tackling, so I won't really get into it much. But yeah, so I was just reminding you of that. Oh, so a bit of comment from that. So it says the variation of collapsing with, or the variation with the collapsing prey that turns into a hook punch with the basket. Okay, so Nat, do you feel comfortable demonstrating that? Or do you, I think I know what you mean, but and I can have a crack at it if you prefer. But if you want to demonstrate that, that's cool as well. So Nat is nursing a cat. No, that's completely understandable. So you can tell me if I get this completely wrong. I've actually, one thing we've been doing the last 2 weeks is interpretation parties where we read through a manual, and there's a few times where I've interpreted stuff and people have gone, you've got that completely wrong, and then prove it right. Yeah, so with the parries, I'll skip the with the parries become a hook. So you parry, your opponent presses, you turn, and come in with a hook. So it's parry, hook, parry, hook. Hopefully that's me getting it right. So Nat says, yes, exactly. We've got another dirty trick comment from who says, most of the part work I've seen shows sword combat evolving into wrestling. So that stuff makes a lot of sense. Yeah, well, so there's a bit of trivia. With single stick competitions or cudgeling competitions, they used to tie a scarf around someone's hand and then tie it between their legs so that they, so they basically had to stand like this to protect their face. And the reason they did that is because otherwise what would happen is the stick fighting would turn into wrestling matches. People would run in, wrestle each other to the ground, and then once they had someone pinned down, hit them in the face with a stick. But yeah, when you're at that close range, it's very, very easy for a sword fight to turn into a wrestling match. Although by the same token, if you can quickly disengage, get under your opponent's sword, you can kind of stop your opponent from coming in, which actually it's probably worth mentioning the further dirty trick. This is less a dirty trick and more of a range control trick. But if I've got an opponent who's pressing in on me in just like a sparring section, they're trying to get close, I keep backing up because they're coming in. What I'll do is I'll riposte them. You don't necessarily want to throw an opening attack low because it's very easy to get panicked. But if I have to riposte and parry and riposte low, usually what that forces my opponent to do is jump backwards to stop themselves from getting cut. And that's it's a good way of stopping someone from coming in. So I've got someone who's trying to throw an attack to come in. I've parried, I riposte low. However, it can be any riposte. Riposte low to get them to jump back and give them some more space. But it works equally well if you've got an opponent who's just throwing normal cuts, not trying to wrestle you. They're just throwing cuts and coming in as aggressively as they can to kind of just stay on top of you and keep pressure. So yeah, that's kind of a way of stopping a grapple from happening, I guess, is, throw a low riposte, which, will send your, usually one or two things will happen. One is your opponent will jump backwards to escape. The other is they'll get chopped in the leg, either of which are good for you. So does anyone else have any dirty tricks they want to share with us? Or does anyone have any questions about dirty tricks? That's looking like a no. James wants to know how to defend against them. Okay, so let's see if we can go through them. Let's see if I. So with the pommel strikes, it's distance control basically. This is a very, very short range attack. So really, it's power. At this full extension, like if I pommel strike someone here, it's not going to do much damage. They need to be about here so I can push through them before my force expends. So the way you don't get pummel struck basically is to stay out of distance. I suspect with Mosh's variant to line up the pommel strike, you could use the same, if you move back off the St. George sort of parry, you could get out of the way. Although the problem with that is with a big heavy cut, you want to be very centered. And I have this bad tendency with big heavy cuts to drive in, which would actually make that worse. So with the pommel strikes, it's mostly about controlling distance. With the grapples, with grips, one is just to not stay extended, but don't lie spent. So I come in, I get back out very, very quick to not give my opponent time to grip. Or if I am hanging around, or if I do think my opponent's going to grip, what I personally, and Tim likes to do, is grapple back. So let's say I attack, someone grabs me and goes force me down on cross. I just basically surge in at them and try and get a grip on their own sword side, or even on their body, and just turn a sword fight into a wrestling match. But I like doing that because I like wrestling. I like boxing. I very much like dirty boxing, which is very close, grab your opponent and sort of, hit them and maybe elbow them if the ref is looking kind of stuff. Like that old style sort of, dirty boxing. If you're not a competent wrestler, that's maybe not the best solution for you. Generally, what you can do is try and recover. So if your opponent does push you down, what you want to do is traverse away from their sword side, or traverse away from their blow and then bring your sword back up. So if I've attacked here, my opponent's grabbed and is forcing me down, their attack is coming this way to my high inside. I bring my tip around, I traverse, I basically pivot or vault and come up to this position to catch it. And on the other side, I've been forced down, and same kind of thing. I just, in this case, I'm going to like traverse and stepping wide, and I'm just sweeping my sword back up. The reason I'm vaulting, I'm moving away from their cut, is I need to give myself more time to get my sword around. So the further you are away, the more time it takes your opponent's sword to get to you. So if my hand is down here, I need to give time to whirl around and come back up and get around the sword. Which is, it's kind of dicey, but if you don't want to grapple and you need to get away, it can work. So that's counters to that. In terms of the other pommel strikes, actually the other two, the ones that are done off a parry, as opposed, that are done, like the first one I showed, this one, that's meant to be done against someone coming in at you. If you've got someone who's barreling in at you and you pommel strike them, it's a defensive pommel strike, yes. The offensive pommel strikes where you parry and come around, there's a distance control. The other thing you can kind of do is just bring your backhand up and just come to this position, really for both, and get low. So if I'm being displaced, someone's coming in, they've knocked my sword aside, I can just do that, and hopefully I can intercept them with my forearm, because copping a pommel to the forearm is better than copping a pommel to the face. But also, if I can get contact with my forearm, I might be able to displace them. But yeah, it's particularly Mosh's one is going to be a lot harder to deal with if distance comes up. So hopefully that gets you some ideas. So Ben wants to know, how would you fight against someone who has a bayonet? That's probably a workshop in its own right, but I'll do my best to summarize. So if you remember back at the start of the lesson, how I talked about there are different guards. So we did the medium because that's the easiest teaching guard, but there's also tiers, and the low hang guard. If you're against an opponent who's got a bayonet, you go to the low hang guard and you want to engage. The worst thing you can do against a bayonet is back off. I've seen a lot of people do sword versus spear or sword versus bayonet, where the person with the sword starts backing up because what they want to do, they don't know what the person with the spear is doing, and they want to get enough space to see, and that's usually the point where they get stabbed. You have to be very forward and aggressive. When I'm facing a bayonet, I actually lean forward slightly and also squeeze my butt cheeks together because I find that doing that makes me feel like I want to go forward. If I'm leaning forward a bit, just as a psychological cue, it tells my brain that it's now forward time. Whereas I find that if I start leaning backwards, I want to keep going backwards. And that's the worst thing to do against a bayonet. I want to be forward. I want to be in this guard position because now my opponent is either going to be engaged here or here. And if they're engaged here, I know that if they're engaged here on top of my sword, regardless of what they do, I can probably parry it by coming up to a high prime. They might beat my sword down. Even if they do, I just need to reactively come up to a high prime, maybe with a slight lateral step just to not get spiked as easily. But there's one thing I need to do. So there's one thing I need to do in that position. And so if they do anything, I'm going to do it. And if they're just, maybe they might just be flapping around, maybe moving their tip to unsettle me. If I do that, parry and come in, it's also a really, really great aggressive action. In fact, if you've got the sword against the bayonet, person with the bayonet puts their bayonet on top of your sword, immediately come in under prime and then attack. And if the other thing to do is keep his hand close by. So as you come in, even bring your hand to here, because something a lot of people with bayonets like to do when their point is offline is come and try and smack you with the butt, at which point you reach out and grab and do the cut. If they engage with their point here under my sword, all I do is push down, come to it's actually quite wide second position, and come in. Again, I want to get my hand out just in case they try and strike me with the butt or the butt of the rifle, butt of the bayonet. So come in, grab, stab, or if they try and back off, if they try and recover, come in with a cut number 7, deliberately punching the hilt of my sword into the middle sort of section of their bayonet. So yeah, hopefully that gives you some ideas. Sword versus bayonet is a really, really difficult thing to do. So Mosh said, okay. Mosh, you mentioned in chat what you do against a bayonet. Do you want to sort of demo it a bit, or do you just want to read it out?
So with what I mentioned in the chat, probably the single best way to deal with it is when you are really comfy with your slips, and also to really make someone do a St. George's, you usually need to put a lot more body English, a lot more movement into it. And that can also be the bane of the movement, because then they just snipe at the arm, they thrust with opposition, all those things. It's like, oh, you're a big dummy, I can just do the fun things. So it's really trying to goad someone into a hyper defensive is the only time that it actually ends up working out.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's the thing with the pommel strikes is 90% of the time it's the solution is to just not be there, not set that up for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. So I've got another chat comment. So we have Shepherd, Savior of the Universe, who wants to know, when you use cutlass with a flintlock, do you need to approach in more aggressive way or distance approach? So with flintlocks, because you only have the one shot, and flintlocks are notoriously inaccurate, which based on how inaccurate they're meant to be, I feel like there's you can get Nerf guns that are about the right size that have the right level of accuracy, which is I've sort of played a little bit with my kids, you know, sort of Nerf gun, but one day I'd like to get like a whole bunch of Nerf pistols and actually do like simulated body action with cutlass and pistol, because that would be fun. Shooting boffers, obviously. Yeah, so generally, if you've got, if your opponent has a pistol, you need to get in close really quick, and you need to make them do things. Like you need to get them parrying so that they're not in a position necessarily to shoot you. If you've got the pistol, having, you know, generally the point where you want to shoot your opponent, according to Pringle Green, is when they're just outside of lunge distance. Just outside of their lunge distance, because you basically want to let them get as close as possible without actually being able to disrupt you. So, and this is his argument for having the pistol in the offhand, is it means that you don't have to factor in, you don't have to put the pistol away after you fire it, because you've already got the sword out. So yeah, so what you'd want to do if you've got a pistol or sword and pistol in your offhand is use the pistol when your opponent is just outside of sword distance, and then you basically, it's a normal sword fight with but you've got the pistol's a parrying device. If you've got an opponent who's got a pistol or who has a pistol that they haven't fired, or you don't know that they're fired, then you need to basically rush them as quick as you can, because it is possible. Actually, I think Pringle Green actually has depictions of people parrying and firing the pistol from the hip at really close range. So that is a risk as well. Is your opponent might do a very big committed parry to basically clear both your sword and their sword out of the way and shoot you. So it's sort of, it's against kind of that judgment kind of thing. Weirdly enough, if you've ever played Mountain Blade Napoleonic Wars, the firearms in that are inaccurate enough that they actually kind of simulate this dynamic where there's a point where you can be not actually that far apart, so on video game terms, and just moving out so you can't get shot. There's this danger zone you have to rush through if you think your opponent can shoot you, to usually bayonet them. But then if you can get close enough to bayonet your opponent, shooting them becomes very difficult. Like them shooting you becomes very difficult. So yeah, if you want a simulation of that, either Nerf guns, which would just be really cool, or play Mountain Blade Napoleonic Wars, or both actually. I think we should all play more Mountain Blade Napoleonic Wars. Worship says, I think there's a way to use the pistol like a parrying dagger. Probably not a good idea. Just give me a second. I'll see if I've got something that can simulate a pistol around here. So I have so much crap in here. Oh my God. Actually, I've got. So if you imagine it's a very, very long pistol, yeah, there are two ways to use the pistol as a parrying device. I mean, one is what Pringle Green recommends, where you hold it like this, and you've got the barrel, which is a pretty solid steel. Like unless they hit I forget what's called, basically where the flint is and the firing mechanism is. They're probably not going to damage the pistol too badly. And this is before gun sights as well. So you like having a gash out of the back of your pistol is not really going to do much. You just sit with it here. And that means your opponent has completely lost a single line of attack. They can't attack you up here. The other option with the pistol, if you don't have time to turn it around, which may not be as fiddly as it is with an axe, is you sit with it down here like with a scabbard, and you just beat. And you just use the fact that the pistol is, because period pistols weigh quite a bit. Like they're much heavier than modern pistols here. They're solid wood, and then the barrels are thicker because the metal they had back in the day wasn't as good, so they didn't, they needed thicker metal basically to stop them blowing up in your face or in your hand. So you can sit here, and it's exactly the same motion as with the scabbard. You just whip up, at anything that comes in and knock it out of the way. So those are kind of your two options with the pistol. You know, use it as basically a shield, improv shield, or alternatively as a beating device. I mean, it's one of those things as well. I think I wouldn't want to use like an actual expensive mechanical pistol for practice bouting, because it would get wrecked. It would get wrecked after like 2-3 sessions. But if there's an engagement, like an enemy's coming in, and I'm only probably going to get in like 1 or 2 fights, there's only going to be like, I'm only going to have to deal with like between 1 and 3 cuts for the duration of whatever it is I'm doing. If every one of those cuts does a little bit of damage to my pistol, it's probably not going to be beyond repair. And also, if it wins me the fight, I don't really care. It's kind of a cool trick, and it's something that would work, but it's also, I guess the difficulty would be getting a training simulator. Although I could talk to John O'Rourke's Spring Bayonet Workshop to see if he can make like a parrying pistol simulator. Just get like make some hand grips, or even just you can get like just the pistol grips without any pistol bits attached. Not too much difficulty. Get one of those and just put like a metal pipe in it and make like a parrying pistol simulator. And if you're going to be like completely absurd with it, you could put like a big rubber. You could put like some high impact rubber or something on the butt, so you could also use it for smacking. Hooper says the body axe simulator might be easier to acquire when basically used in a similar way, I expect. Yeah, so it's there's better and better axe simulators out there now. I mean, Purple Heart has some that look really, really good. They're all synthetics, although I've actually been designing a metal axe simulator that I hope one day to get made, but basically the idea is you have just thin steel so it's quite a light axe. So you're looking at like, 4mm steel. But the edge, the cutting edge is rolled. So you've got a very, very thick cutting edge and then a fairly light axe. So it's kind of like a feather, and hopefully it will hit lightly enough. Because just to demonstrate something. So this is a blunt axe I used to use for reenactment. If you can see that, it does have, it's like a, in some bits 2mm, mostly 1mm edge. And I did try HEMA sparring with this with my friend Chris, who I don't think is here tonight. But what we found is that we very quickly started being very careful, because we started off slow and said we're going to escalate till we know it's safe, and we found we just did not escalate very much because there's a lot of weight up the top of this, and it's, unless I can get the edge much, much thicker, all that force is going, all of the force of this going into, even like a 2mm edge is not very safe. Whereas if I can get something that is lighter and thinner, that is, thinner than this, and therefore lighter, but has a much thicker edge, it would be a lot safer. That'd be a nice way to have a steel simulator. All right, cool. Yeah, so James has said, if you walk away alive, if you feel lost again, it's a fair trade. Not that it's much relevant these days. Yeah, no, it's a fair point, James. Yeah, I mean, probably back in the day, like even quite expensive gear would still be considered expendable. I mean, that was certainly true in the early 19th century when we still had cuirassiers. They expected their armor to be so badly damaged from battle that it wouldn't be used again. And making like a steel breastplate, or like a fitted steel breastplate, is pretty expensive. I mean, even today they're more expensive than a sword. So I had a few comments, people talking about rubber band guns. Mosh wants to run a rapier and pistol tournament with rubber band guns, which just sounds like a really, really cool idea. I think rubber band guns are the way to go, and I know there's a few places that actually makes them custom. So you could potentially just say, right, can you give me one without a firing mechanism that's solid, so it lasts a bit longer. Which is, if you want to make a parrying one, and then just keep your rubber band one for special occasions. But no, it's cool. So I've got sort of space for a few more questions. I think if anyone else has any questions they want to ask either me or also anyone else, you're more than welcome to jump in. It's not like this is meant to be a bit of a discussion. So if there's feel free to sort of jump in and ask anyone else any questions about anything they've said. So another comment. I hope it's just cool. So it's just mourning the loss of events. Cool. I think Nat wants to ask me something. Feel free to share the sort of the question answer with everyone else if you want, or if you just want to have a private chat as well. That's more than welcome to. Kirok and Hopper have both said canon. It's confirmed. So Nat wants to find out about mixed gear. Mick, if you want to jump on, show everyone on camera what gear you've been using.
It was a cutlass from the medieval shop down at Wollongong Way. Fig tree.
Cool.
Medieval cutlass.
It's like
it's really
like a French cup.
It's quite comfortable and it's quite sharp. You're going to be fun in the backyard with that.
Oh, nice. Right, so you said so that's from medieval shop.
Medieval shop. Down at Fig Tree.
Cool.
Yeah. It's quite good. Quite comfortable.
Cool.
Good fun.
Yeah. So you mean, well,
it wasn't overly expensive. I don't buy overly expensive, but I think Cleveland Firearms have a cold steel cutlass machete still.
Who does? Sorry.
Cleveland Firearms in Queensland.
Okay.
It's called a machete by Cold Steel. Probably about the $50 mark.
Yeah, you can get the cold steel machetes for fairly cheap.
Yes, the cutlass machete. I've got one upstairs. I'll find it, bring it down.
Right, that'd be good. Yeah, show off.
I'll be back.
Show off gear. Let's see, turn into a bit of a show and tell. All right, cool. Yeah. Sort of. Well, I guess I sort of showed off my axe, which I originally got this for a Viking reenactment back when I was a reenactor. Which I sort of been thinking of getting back into doing Viking stuff, but I want when I get new Viking weapons, I want to make sure they're all sort of suitable for HEMA combat as well. Reenactors have different gear standards in terms of what isn't acceptable to sort of the HEMA community. So I'm going to try and get swords and axes and things that I can use for both. Good. I mean, may also do a workshop on Viking weapons for one of these, depending. Need to work out how to do it though, because everything I taught Viking weapons wise back when I taught it, or guesstimated from later period sources, I guess, required another person. So I'll see what I can work out for individual lessons, or for isolation lessons. So who says? Okay, cool. So I've got Well, thank you, Hooper. That's really lovely of you. Yes. Go on. Yes, I apologize to all of our American friends. Yeah, this is on so early in the morning. So, Hooper's back.
That's the cutlass machete.
Ah, cool.
It's got a nice grip. It's quite comfortable. It's not finely balanced, but like for the money, 2.8 mil thick.
No?
And you can have a lot of fun with that little bad boy.
Yeah, I've got I think I'm definitely going to get a machete for next winter just because
30 rule, 24 inch blade.
Nice. Yeah, it's proper cutlass
A
length.
few of those like D-guard machetes they make, which you can play around with.
Yeah.
And Cleaver's got prices, but you got to make sure it's in, otherwise he'll take your money and hold it and wait till he's ready to give it out.
A big one, sorry? You sort of...
Well, if Cleaver will take your money if it's not in stock, because he drop ships sometimes. So you've got to make sure it's actually in the shop.
Otherwise, you'll be waiting for a very long time.
Wasting your money. Otherwise, you'll have to wait. But yeah, they're a lot of fun to play with too.
Yeah, be good around the garden.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Milk bottles, cardboard rolls, you know, bamboo. Yeah, flying green bamboo is just isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Also, I mean, thankfully, I haven't seen any bamboo up here, but I remember when I was living in Sydney, you know, you'd see, like, because bamboo is an invasive species, if you do see it, you do need to cut it up. So, you know, I know it's like fighting for the environment.
Well, anyway, you said it's great fun.
Yeah. Cool. All right, so, cool. So, I've got another question from Shepard. Will boarding spear be used like a bayonet, or is it a little bit different? Short answer, I might actually need a sec. I'll actually grab one of my spears for this. Hopefully I can do without knocking anything off. So. All right. So the difference between bayonet and like a boarding pike, or if you're dealing Napoleonic era, like if some armies still had officers still had pikes, right, or more like a partisane than pike, but still had a polearm. The techniques are the same. It's like saber and cutlass. The techniques are the same, but the weapons do move differently, so the tactics are different. So this is a lot more nimble, and this is also, which is also the reason why I don't like people using, using spears as a bayonet substitute, because the fact that this is a lot more nimble, a lot quicker in the hand, can often can give you a bad impression of how a bayonet would move. But on the other side, it is lighter. So like my butt strokes are not going to have as much impetus, as much force, and also the balance is different. So I do think these are good. Like if you're skilled in bayonet and you pick up a boarding pike, you'll probably be able to use it with all the same techniques, but it'll perform a bit differently, and sorts of tactics you want are a little bit different. You might, but you can also do stuff like this where you can shift your hands and your throw points are a lot quicker. So yeah, a little bit. Techniques, it's like a cutlass and a saber. Techniques are the same, but the tactics are a bit different, if that makes sense. And yeah, in spite of all that banging, nothing broke. All right, so does that answer your question?
I practice playing. I used to use a spear, but it's much shorter. They're only about 3 feet long. Maybe 4 feet. They're about 3.5 feet long. And I practice styres with that, and it's because it's got a much thicker handle. It's got a what do you call it? A stay handle, hoe handle. So it's really solid.
Yep. Oh yeah. Well, 20th century weapons. I mean, this is a I'll back up a bit. This is a 20th century bayonet trainer. So this is modeled up. I think these are actually this is from Purple Heart, which is the same manufacturers who make them from the US Marine Corps.
Yep.
this is a very, very different weapon to a period bayonet, whereas, go through, so this is a bayonet simulator. Normally it has a epee blade in here, which, here we go. So this is this is something that Paul Wagner of Staccato came up with so that we could do bayonet before John O'Rowe with Spring Bayonet Workshop came on the scene. But you can see, like, this is the length of most 19th century firearms. So like a Brown Bess musket, or a, like, you're even getting into like the early, like the World War I era kind of rifles. And it's, if you want a mark of comparison, it's a lot longer. And like the Steyr period stuff is kind of halfway between, because World War II rifles are shorter, or actually, like, well, 1950s era rifles are shorter, but they're not that short. So, you know, something like this, which is different again. So yeah, which, yeah, kind of, I don't know, so it's sort of, the technique, the length, it seems to me that like the length of the weapon tends to dictate the technique. So, you know, a Brown Bess with a bayonet and a boarding pike handle very, very similar. Whereas, like, you know, a modern rifle with a bayonet handles very, very differently.
It's a bit of fun to practice some techniques he's got in there, so it's, you play with what you got, don't you?
Oh yeah, oh, it's a lot of fun. It's like well, it's actually for a while, what the US military was doing is they had what they call pugil sticks. So they're like, they're basically just a length of probably, pardon?
With the pad on each end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and apparently you can make, like, they're really easy to make. You just need some.
I think they're more an aggression builder than a weapon, than developing aggression in people.
Oh yeah, probably, but they look like a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do want to try and make some of those a try, because they were. The idea was that it's actually something you see in those World War II bayonet manuals, where they actually do emphasize using the butt a lot more. So 19th century bayonet, only some manuals actually talk about using anything other than the point. Like, it's sort of, and it's usually the more detailed manuals. And then you get into the 20th century. There's actually, there is a World War II era American film, training film for bayonet, where basically what they say, they just compare using the bayonet to a bunch of other sports that Americans would have presumably already been familiar with. So they say basically the bayonet is, it's like boxing. So, you know, you have your jab, which is your attacks with the point. They're kind of slashy. They're not necessarily proper thrusts. And then you have, you know, your hooks or your cross, and that's your butt stroke. And that's, they say, just like, it's basically how to apply kind of boxing technique and ideas to bayonet. And the other one they do is they move back and forth like this, because that's what they did in the period, at least that's what they did in gridironing football. And they basically just say, you just run back and forth. And then when you want to attack someone, you basically move in and you just body slam them with the bayonet out in front. Or the other one, the subject of dirty tricks that they do, is they come in and you slam the center of your bayonet into your opponent's bayonet to drive it out of the way. And then you kind of hit them with the stock, or you kind of hit them with the butt. Yeah. But you also just kind of crash into them, and because they're crashing into them with, you know, a big heavy rifle, and that's enough.
I think that's what films are done when.
And yeah, that was sort of. I know that's a kind of an interesting method, although like 90% of what Americans in World War II did is they just said, right, when you're doing bayonet stuff, just work into like two-person teams. You pick an enemy, you just pick a target, you both got the target, and you separate, and the target will have to face one person. If they face the person on the left, the person on the right attacks, basically just charges them. If they face the person on the left, the person on the right attacks. And if they And if they don't, they try and stay in the middle, you both go them.
There was something in the British Empire where they talked about one of the formations with Bayonet, where as they saw a formation with the front line, they always went with the person in front and the person to the left. I think so they could always work with 2-on-1.
Okay, yeah, there's
I was reading about it in the British Empire. It's in that book somewhere.
yeah. Or actually, that's one of the earliest Bayonet manuals we have from a guy Anthony Gordon, I believe. And his last name is Gordon, but I keep referring to him as Gordon. I've forgotten his first name. But basically, his manual is broken into 3 parts. The first part is offers a sword, which is basically a small sword or an epee. Then the middle section is instruction is how to, as an officer, how to drill your troops. And then the third section is bayonet. But that's all it is basically you just learn basic how to hold the bayonet, how to thrust with it. And then everything else is basically doing half thrust, so you thrust at your opponent without actually committing, or like doing a full thrust when your opponent is looking at someone else. And you basically, he says most of what you train your soldiers to do is just thrust sideways to attack their opponents when their opponent's not looking, and get your soldiers just to be really, really aggressive, and that's all you really need. Also got a comment from Shepherd who says, based on my own army experience, one man is very different. You need to rush it. There's no tapping stuff. Yeah, I mean, my military knowledge sort of stops at like 1900, so yeah, I think it's, I imagine that would be the case. You just want to rush in. I don't know, Shepherd, when you're in the army, or if you're still in the army, is that like, did you do any bayonet training?
Can I say something?
Yeah, go for it.
Oh, it's like this. It's more like because I have some experience while I was in China, like do some army training, because the way they do the army training is like very, very, very old fashioned. The way they do that is more like they want to like they don't have enough firepower. So what do you want to do? They want to get in close to the distance, rush in, take their position, so that is why there's no space for you to do something like a dueling stuff. You're getting a little bit out of distance and do a little bit small dueling. You want to pretty much rush in, get to as close as possible. So I think it's probably because the different tactical approach to make your way, the training is very, very different.
Okay, yeah. In the 19th century, the British, like they did have sort of the bayonet dueling stuff, but they do also have like assault course. Like you basically just ran it through packets, and that's what there are a lot of people in the British military in the 19th century who argued that you don't actually need to teach soldiers to fence with the bayonet. You just, like, all they need to know is how to rush in. So it might be the same sort of thing that you did, where most of what they reckon just most of it is about rushing in. I do kind of wonder as well, like with what we do when people are actually fighting, like boarding ships, how much of it is just rushing in, like is more just getting in close and throwing, like either throwing a quick feint or a quick parry or riposte, and that's it. Like that's sort of one of my other dreams. Something that probably would work at like festivals sort of Ormac is to do some mass combat. So actually like just probably do it with buffers for safety, but just like go, right, well, what happens when, you've got like 5 people fighting, you've got a whole bunch of people with swords facing off against each other. So yeah, I think that'd be interesting, but yeah, no, I find it's really interesting what you're saying, Shepherd, about how like most modern game is just rushing in, like there's not a lot of dueling, there's not a lot of technique to it.
Yeah, and the other point is based on I did some silly things before, which is I get a little bit trial with one of my friend. He don't know anything about HEMA. I put all his body protection on him, and pretty much he just rushing with the sword and like a maniac. So, well, this is an experience. I don't recommend other people do that, but it's pretty much give me the understanding, like in the real fight, actually the altitude for you to pretty much ignore any potentially consequence, and the rushing is actually much more powerful than skill. So that's why they teach you to just rush, I guess. And actually based on, I think Matt Easton's, he recommended that book, the British Emperor's, the Swordsman of British Emperor, right? There's a lot of example of people who do terrible in training, but they in a duel, he just don't care about the consequence, and they actually win a lot of the duel. There's a lot of record for that as well.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Was actually, so a while back, I fell down a rabbit hole of looking into the training given to bouncers, and also the experiences of bouncers, because as much as, like, the security industry is not necessarily terribly well regulated, there are people who do like training for bouncers, and one of the things they said is that the hardest thing to deal with is someone who just rushes at you, like, until and one of the things you actually have to train to deal with, like, is someone who is untrained but really, really aggressive, because you can do a lot of, like, the boxing, kickboxing, mixed martial arts you like, but that's not necessarily going to teach you what to do if there's just someone who's just very big, who just runs at you not using technique, unless you train specifically to deal with that. It can really take you by surprise. So imagine sort of similar to your experience as Shepherd, where you gave your friend gear, and he just sort of rushed you, and it was quite funny. And I've had people do that to me as well. Like, just offensive people who are just really aggressive off the bat. I remember I've been doing sword fighting for about 2 years. The first time I experienced this, this guy who did Kempo, I think, came along to my club, and he wanted to have a go. So I gave him a sword, and he just swung at me really, really hard. It was really difficult to deal with. So yeah, I think it's sort of that whole aggression thing. Is really quite confronting if you've not had, or if you're not experienced with it.
That's what we discussed in that first night. When we did the Bowie knife fight. We did the Bowie knife fighting, and we discussed that very point, that if you go into the YouTube of the actual fights, as soon as the other person's armed, the whole mindset of the attacker changes. It's except for the honey badger, you don't care, but yeah, it's just awesome to watch that whole mindset changed.
Yeah, once you've sort of got that's like, yeah, that sort of that's psychology, and also the difference in scenario as well, I think. So I've got some comments from James and Mosh. So Mosh says, almost all of the stuff that's super easy to beat in a fencing setting really shines in those mass combat fighting situations. Like how sword and targe is not great dueling, such fencing setting, but for field and assault, they're tremendous. My experience being the SC battle game, I assume SC is Swordcraft, so Swordcraft battle game, which usually has 200 to 500-ish people every Friday, which just, that's Mosh's comment, but just to that, I think Swordcraft sounds really, really amazing. Where you've got, like, I think the largest group combat I've ever done was 5 aside. So the idea of having, like, even 100 aside, like just the smaller end of Swordcraft, just sounds amazing. But yeah, it's really cool. I guess that kind of Mosh's comment as well about how stuff that doesn't work so well in individual combat works a lot better in a mass battle situation, probably does, would explain why a lot of that stuff was practiced and stuck around. Like, sword and taj, might not be the best sort of weapon combination for individual combat, but people did it for hundreds of years. And so we're still in the Scots Highlanders. We're still doing it in like the mid 1700s. It's something that it was obviously something useful enough to keep, or like it had enough of an application to remain relevant. So even if it is, I guess it's kind of intuitive. If it's not working in a one-on-one fight, then it's probably working in a battlefield situation, or like a mass combat situation, I guess. And then we've got a comment from James, who says, the best swordsman in the world doesn't need to fear the second best swordsman in the world. The person for him to be afraid of is some ignorant antagonist who has never had a sword in his hand before. He doesn't do the thing he ought to do, and so the expert isn't prepared for him. James, it's something I found when I was at the Macquarie Dark Ages Society, and I've been doing sword fighting for maybe like 2-3-ish years. When I started teaching there, I was very, very underprepared for teaching, but I was also the most experienced person there because the guy who had been teaching us couldn't come anymore, and there was no one to replace him. But yeah, like you have to have specific tactics for dealing with an inexperienced fencer. Like you need to know, like you need to have something there, because otherwise they will do random strange stuff that if you sat down and thought about it shouldn't work, but does just because it's so out of the ordinary. If you remember that combination, like that combo we did, where I said, right, attack the sword arm, attack the body. That was actually my solution to that problem of an inexperienced fencer. You attack the sword, you attack their sword hand because they will react to that, or if they don't, they'll get whacked in the sword hand. And if you can disable someone's weapon hand so that they can't hold a weapon, you've pretty much ended the fight. And then, so my solution was attack the opponent's sword hand. They would react. They'd usually, if they're aggressive newbie, which is the worst kind to have to deal with, they'd nearly always immediately throw a return, which I'd then parry and use to hit them. Or the other thing I'd actually do is I'd retreat so their attack would follow me, and they'd overextend themselves, and then I'd hit them in the sword hand anyway. But yeah, like I remember I thought there was a point where I thought I was getting pretty decent at sword fighting. Well, not great, but I was starting to be able to hold my own against more experienced people. I was starting to get the hang of the techniques. I was feeling pretty good, and then I went to the Macquarie Dark Ages Society when a new crop of recruits had come in. New crop of recruits come in, and I had some just people just very athletic, just beat the tar out of me, just because they were fitter, and I'm like, oh, I need to bat more. So Mick makes a comment. He says, I can say I'm a little disappointed tonight. I at the time, and I'm only one with it, and I'm the only one with beer. Yeah, no, it's fair. I think we've moved pretty much into sort of the drink and chat time. Although this sort of the flow was kind of intuitive, was kind of very natural. And normally what I do is I stop recording when we move on to conversation, but there wasn't really a natural break, and we had a lot of comments. Cool. So unless anyone has anything else they want to say kind of on the record, I might end the recording here. But we will still keep chatting because we always do. And like the social aspect to this is something that is really, really important. And with the Old Sword Club, we're not just a fencing club, we're also a group of friends. And especially now that we're all in isolation, I think it's very, very important that we actually communicate with each other just to stay sane. So we might wrap up here. I'll say goodbye to anyone who's watching the recording. Hope you enjoyed the conversation, and that you can maybe even join us in person in the future. But for everyone else who's like still here, we'll still hang around and just have a drink. I'm just going to finish recording.